if you have any, sorry, there was this announcement about recording. We will be recording this, so anyone that has to leave early or that is unable to attend this training, we will be sending the recording to them to watch, and then they will self-certify that they're watching it. If there's any questions, there will be a little bit of time that we will allow for questions, and then we will ask that you submit them to me, and we'll put that email on the screen for you to submit them. If time allows, I will summarize them. We'll take like the top, handful of them. And then anything that we don't have time to discuss in the meeting, we will make sure and get you written answers after the training. So please feel free to keep the questions coming, even if it's after the training. I think that's about it. Just a real brief welcome, but I should have said this in the beginning. Zoe Mirabili, City Clerk. I think I know most of you either from meeting in person, or I think we met a lot of via Zoom when we did the interviews. So I'm representing the City Manager's Office. We just wanted to say thank you so much for attending this training. Your time is very valuable, both as commissioners and then tonight as the training for being a commissioner. Again, our attorneys, Inder, Khalsa, and David Lynn will be leading this training. And thank you once again.
Thank you, Zoe. Good evening, everyone. We're so happy to have you here. So some of you may have attended, or listened to the AB 1234 training that we provided to City Council. And that training is statutorily required, and the statute actually contains a very long list of topics that we have to cover. And it's really useful for touching on, a lot of topics very lightly, but it isn't very good for getting into some more of the in-depth issues that tend to come up for councils and commissions. So we thought that in providing some training to commissioners, we would break it up into, 2 or 3 shorter 1-hour segments so that we could get a little deeper into the subject matter, hopefully answer some more of your questions about the topics. And tonight we are going to be looking just at the Brown Act, which is the Sunshine Law, transparency laws in California, and due process and fairness issues. And we'll be touching on some of the issues that I covered in the memos that have been shared with all of you. David, will you advance the slides? So we start off by just talking about generally just some general principles of local governance, and just maybe a way of reframing some of these rules, which can sometimes feel quite onerous and difficult, especially if you are new to being a city official and being a commissioner. But in general, the longer you've been doing this, the more I think you would agree that transparency is not only a public good, but it actually makes all of our lives easier. Involving the public is how we have such a robust democracy here in the city of Davis. And in general, more transparency is usually easier in the long run for everyone involved. Process is incredibly important. And a lot of times we are faced with situations where no matter what decision you make, you're going to make someone unhappy. Everyone has vested interests and strong viewpoints. Let me tell you, if you follow the process to the letter and everyone is given an opportunity to share their viewpoint, many people will be happier and more accepting of the final result, even when the city ultimately doesn't go in the direction that they wanted to go. So every step of the way, we try to watch for process. And hopefully it goes without saying, but there is definitely such a thing as bad publicity. And I know none of us wants to be called out on, from any local news sources for having violated the Brown Act, an important transparency law. But it can be easy to inadvertently step into a problem with the Brown Act, hence the training. So advance one more and we'll talk about receiving questions. So we did not notice this as a joint meeting of all of you as commissioners, and we did not invite the public into this meeting. So we're going to be discussing, why that's important in this Brown Act section. But one issue that raises is that I didn't want to just open the floor to you all to just ask us questions and have us respond, because the likelihood that someone would talk about something that was a matter of their commission's business in the hearing of other commissioners was just too great, and that would have been a Brown Act violation. So we decided to structure questions a little bit differently here, just in order to move this along without having to notice it as an entirely public meeting. which was to have you submit your questions to Zoe, and then Zoe will pick, a few of the questions that she thinks raise some good hypotheticals. She'll probably take out some of any identifying information about who sent it and maybe anyone that's talked about in the email itself. And then David and I will address those questions. And then the rest of the questions we will go through and we'll respond to you in writing, hopefully in the next few days. If you ask a tough question, we may respond to let you know that we need some more time to look into it. So here is Zoe's email address, which is also available on the website. And feel free to just, shoot her all your Brown Act questions. We may not get to address each of them verbally today, but we want to know what's going on with your commissions so that we can help you. And we look forward to hearing from you. All right, and with that, I will let my esteemed colleague, David Lim, who has a really, really interesting and I think extremely pertinent background, talk about the Brown Act. David was actually a district attorney for, I believe, 20 years, worked in Alameda County, but he also served 2 terms as a council member in San Mateo. So he comes to this, to the Brown Act and to the other local government laws with a sort of different perspective. He knows what it's like to be sitting on the dais. He's been out there in the community in awkward situations, wondering whether or not he was running into a conflicts or a Brown Act problem. So with that, I'll let David talk to you about Brown Act issues, and then we'll come back to me to talk about due process. All right.
Okay, thanks, Inder. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to virtually see everybody. I count about 113 commissioners in this room right now, which is a crazy number of commissioners. What Inder didn't tell you is, in addition to me being on the city council in San Mateo, I actually did real work before I became a council member. I was a commissioner for 9 years before I got elected to the city council. And I'll share a secret that all of you know, that commissioners, you guys do the heavy lifting that makes the council look good, because you're the first line. Anytime there's an issue, you guys vet it first. It comes up to you first, and you make a recommendation to council, and you've got the angry people coming to your meetings. You've got to read the packets for the first time. You've got to sort of vet the policy on what's good and what's not good. So kudos to all of you, but I cannot believe there's 113 commissioners in the city of Davis. That is awesome. That is representative democracy at its best. I think in San Mateo, we maybe had like 50. I think we had way less commissions than you. So kudos to all of you. My hat's off to all of you for stepping up and doing the hard job of being a commissioner. You all deserve double pay for coming here today and being a commissioner. And see, you're laughing. See, we all as fellow commissioners, we know the joke, right? You get double pay. So that's awesome. What we're going to talk about tonight is Brown Act. And I want to let you know that I didn't tell you that I was a commissioner, and Inder didn't tell you I was a council member so I could brag. I'm telling you this because I've been where you are. I've had to do the things that I'm going to recommend to you today, and they've been tested in the fire. And I will also share with you that some of the things that I was taught and learned to do as a commissioner, I didn't necessarily agree with when I first, was told this is the best practice for good governance. So, they're hard fought battles. I'm going to, as much as I can, explain to you the rationale for why I think these are the best practices. And I hope you will, take them with the fact that, I had to live it for basically like 17 years, 9 years as a commissioner, 8 years as a council member. So I'm not just telling you because, I'm this mean, grumpy lawyer. It's kind of through hard-won experience that I'm going to share with you what I learned as a commissioner. So the Brown Act. What is the Brown Act? I didn't even know when I first became a commissioner that the Brown Act was named after this gentleman, Ralph M. Brown. That's the good Assembly Member Brown, later Judge Brown. And he is famous in California for all time for enacting the Ralph M. Brown Act, which basically says all meetings of the legislative body of a local agency shall be open and public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the legislative body of a local agency except as otherwise provided in this chapter. I mean, that sounds like something an assembly person and judge of California would write. He was a champion of transparency. This is Ralph M. Brown. He was an awesome guy. Look at him. He served in the California State Assembly for almost 20 years. He was the Speaker of the Assembly for 2 years. He only quit the Assembly because they got appointed to the California appellate courts as an associate justice. And then he passed away in 1966. He is best known, obviously, as being the author of the ultimate law on how government bodies operate, and he is known as the champion of transparency. This is some things that Mr. Brown was not. He was not all things. He was not all powerful. So he was not about doing things fast. He was not about doing things efficiently. And as commissioners, you're probably all like, yeah, now that's just kind of making sense. Why we do things the way we do, right? When you wonder, why do we have to do all these laws? Remember, Mr. Brown was not about doing things fast. He was not about doing them efficiently, okay? He was not about friends working together. Now, I don't know if he had a great social life outside of being an assembly member and judge, but when he was a politician and an assembly member and judge, he could not care less about your relationship with your friends, about being nice to people. He was about doing things the right way. So these are some things that Mr. Brown was not. Okay, here's another important thing that I guarantee you at some point being a commissioner, you will think Mr. Brown was trying to do to you. Okay, because you're going to want to say something, you're going to want to give an opinion, you're going to want to post something on social media, and somebody like either myself or Inder are going to tell you, you probably shouldn't do it. And you're going to think Mr. Brown was trying to limit my exercise to free speech or limit my ability to state my opinion. And I guarantee you, Mr. Brown was not about trying to limit your right to exercise free speech or state your opinion. In fact, if you look at what Mr. Brown was about with these transparency laws, Mr. Brown just wanted to make sure everyone had an equal chance to hear your opinion. And I'm going to repeat that again, because this is very important. Mr. Brown was not about trying to limit your right to exercise free speech or state your opinion. He just wanted to make sure that everybody in the city of Davis had an equal chance to hear your very important opinions. Because for all the kidding I said about being a commissioner, it's a big deal to be a commissioner. You know, you've been selected by the elected representatives of the city of Davis to represent them as commissioners, to give them sound advice and counsel on important matters to the city. You're their first line of defense. You hear the important issues, you deliberate on them, and then you make recommendations, which they may or may not turn into policy. You assist staff in weeding out the contentious issues and finding out what the community is really thinking. You've been elevated, even though it doesn't show in your pay scale, but by becoming a commissioner, you've been elevated to the status, a very important status of being a government representative, of being a representative to the people, not by election, but by appointment. And when we do that as commissioners, we have a very sacred duty to make sure that we allow every single person in the city of Davis to be able to reflect on our thoughts, our opinions, our deliberations, and to tell us if they agree with us, to tell us if they think we're stupid, to tell us if they think we're full of hot air. They have a right to hear everything we think about, and everything we deliberate on. And that is what the Brown Act at its essence is about. It's making sure everyone has an equal chance to hear your opinions. And that's a heady, important thing for all of you to kind of get your head wrapped around. So I'll give you a minute to kind of deflate your head a little bit so you can fit it back on the screen, and then we're going to move on. But remember, it's I'm not kidding, it is a very important and sacred task to make sure that everyone gets a chance to hear what you're thinking and saying. So what does the Brown Act, or to whom does the Brown Act apply? What is a meeting? How does the Brown Act define a meeting? What rules apply to these meetings? And what are the remedies if we make a mistake and violate the Brown Act? We're going to cover these 4 topics today. And then Inder is going to talk to you about due process. But these 4 boxes are my task to share with you today. So let's start with who does the Act apply to, or to whom does the Act apply to? The Act applies to any legislative body. And that begs the question, what is a legislative body? Well, luckily I've made this slide here. You can take a look at it. It's a governing body of the agency, but it also includes, so the governing body would be the city council, obviously, but it also includes any subordinate boards and commissions created by formal action of the governing body. And for those of you interested, the Brown Act is codified, written down in the California Government Code. If you're ever, if you have insomnia, can't sleep at night, go ahead and crack open the government code, go ahead and read the Brown Act from cover to cover. It's exciting stuff. I hate to say I've read it more than once, both as a council member, a commissioner, and as an attorney. And I always kind of fall asleep midway through it, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. If you are a subordinate board or commission, meaning if you're at this meeting, you're on a commission, the Brown Act applies to you. Standing committees with regular meeting schedules and continuing subject matter jurisdiction are also covered under the Brown Act. We're going to get deep into the weeds on this one, so stand by for that. What is not a legislative body? That's almost as important as knowing what a legislative body is. And that can be advisory committees composed solely of the members of the legislative body that are less than a quorum of the legislative body and do not have continuing subject matter jurisdiction. We're going to get deep into the weeds on this one too. So stand by, hold your questions, because I know some people are going to ask questions about this one, but hold on to them because we're going to really cover this. So what's an appointed body? I already answered this one. If you're at this meeting, if you're sitting in this Zoom meeting, you're a legislative body. You're a commission for the city of Davis. Here's the majority of the commissions. You have so many commissions, I couldn't fit them all on this screen. So there's a couple. My apologies if you're one of the commissions that was at the bottom of the website and I didn't cut and paste you. You can complain to me later. I'll make it up to you when I finally get to meet you in person. I'll buy you coffee or something. So these are all the commissions that I could fit on the screen, but there's a lot of you and it's awesome. And you cover a large range of topics. So these are appointed bodies. You are legislative bodies for purposes of the Brown Act. So we know that. Now, let's go into the weeds. We want to talk about standing committees and ad hoc committees, because when I was a commissioner, this one was the most confusing because, you know, you think when you become a commissioner, okay, I'm going to be on the commission. I'm going to hit stand in my commission. And then you do a great job. And a council member or staff member says, hey, we're doing an advisory committee to, you know, look at dog parks. And we want you to be on this extra committee. And you're like, awesome. And you go home and you tell your spouse and they're like, wait a minute, you know, you said it was every other Thursday and now you're going to another Tuesday meeting. What's going on? Okay, that's your own issue. I'm not dealing with that tonight. But standing committees are things that you will get asked to do because you're all awesome people. And at some point, you're going to be tagged because you do good work and you do it for free. Okay, so a standing committee is a committee that is less than a quorum of the body. Okay, so usually most commissions are 5 people, so less than the quorum would be 2, right? Anything 1 or 2 people. And the standing committee has either continuing subject matter jurisdiction or a meeting fixed by charter, ordinance, resolution, or formal action of a legislative body. So let's sort of unwind that for a minute and give you some examples. If, for example, your commission decides you want to form a standing committee of 2 individuals to look at, I don't know, the donations from nonprofits that feed projects that you're running in your commission, that's a standing committee because you guys have decided we're going to have 2 of us look at this on a regular basis and then give reports back to the main commission. You become subject to the Brown Act. Yay, okay? Let's say 2 of you on a committee, on a commission, get asked to join up with 2 members of another commission at the request of the city council, either by resolution or by formal action by the council saying, staff, go ahead and form this standing committee to look at pedestrian safety in Davis and report back to us. Okay, so 2 of you get tagged in one commission, 2 of you get tagged in another. Yay, congratulations. You're now subject to the Brown Act. Okay, those are standing committees. Remember, this is important, that even if your committee comprises less than a quorum of the governing body, so if there's only 2 of you, you can say, well, wait a minute, the Brown Act says it has to be 3 or more or a majority of our commission to be a subject to the Brown Act. No. A standing committee can be just 2 of you. It can be 1 of you, right? If one of you is the head of your commission and you're like, I'm going to take it upon myself every day to, you know, review all the agendas before they come out and write a synopsis of all of them and give it to my fellow commissioners so that we can make the meetings go faster because I didn't sign up for 3-hour meetings. You've become a standing committee of 1, and you're probably violating the Brown Act by doing that, okay? The Attorney General has also said, and the Attorney General, for those of you who don't know, is the top attorney in the state of California, so we have to listen to what she or he says. They wrote an opinion that says you do not get to say you're not a standing committee and then just not be a standing committee. So it's not like, so the playgrounds where you're like, not it. You don't get to do a not it on a standing committee. It really is dependent on how you form, what work you are doing, and whether you meet regularly with something in subject matter jurisdiction. Compare that to an ad hoc committee. Okay, these are the two big ones. You got standing committees and you got ad hoc committees. Ad hoc committees are basically temporary committees. And at some point a long time ago, somebody used the word ad hoc. It sounded fancy. And so now everyone uses the word ad hoc because they want to sound fancy. It means temporary. Okay, so a temporary advisory committee has to be less than the quorum. So if you got 3 or 4 commissioners, you're just the commission at that point. You're not an ad hoc committee. You cannot have an ad hoc committee of the majority of you on the commission. So it's got to be less than a quorum. So in most cases, if there's 5 of you, it could be 2 or less. And it has to serve a very limited or specific purpose that is not perpetual, and that will be dissolved once a specific task is completed. The most common ad hoc committee is you've been tasked with hiring or vetting a number of applicants for a city contract, and you're going to make a recommendation to council. And so you say, you know what, we're going to form an ad hoc committee who's going to do the preliminary interviews of the 5 applicants. They're going to write up their findings, give it to staff, and then we're going to come back as a commission and deliberate on it and make our recommendations to council. That is the most common definition of an ad hoc or temporary committee. The fun one that I always saw too is if you're planning some sort of parade or event, like you're doing the 4th of July parade and they need help. And so 2 of you on the park and rec join the fireworks committee because, they need help determining, how high the fireworks should get fired. You can tell I know nothing about fireworks. But that would be a good example of an ad hoc committee. A lot of parties, hirings, those are good ad hoc committees. The warning for this is, remember what I said previously, is the Attorney General has said, you don't get to decide if you are ad hoc or standing. It depends on the facts and what you're formed for. So just saying, hey, we're ad hoc, doesn't make you ad hoc, okay? Does not do that, doesn't work that way. So that leads me to my number 1, first tip of the day. Here it is. It's in yellow highlights so that you can remember it and you can come back to it. This was what I always thought of when I was on the commission or on city council. This is how I operated. I always assumed I was on a standing committee, unless otherwise told by city staff or the city attorney. I just assumed that I was going to be on a standing committee because, as I'm going to show you under remedies and violations, you'd rather err on the side of assuming you're under the Brown Act and doing everything under the Brown Act than be like, yeah, we're just going to wing it and hope everything works out later on down the line. Because that can have important and bad ramifications, not only for you, but for the city that you love and the city council members who appointed you to the commission. So that's my tip of the day. It's free. Take it for what it's worth. Use it, lose it, do whatever you want with it. Okay, moving on. So what is a meeting? A meeting. So we now know what is a legislative body. So what's a meeting, right? When are we in a meeting? So we know who we are. There's 5 of us. When are we having a meeting? So any meeting is a congregation of a majority of people, a majority of commissioners at the same time and location, including Zoom. We used to say teleconference, but I don't think anyone does phone conferences anymore. And the meeting is to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take any action on any item. Let me repeat that one because it's important. To hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item. That's pretty broad. Now we're going to delve into that as to what exactly that means. And it has to be within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission. So for example, if you're on the senior commission and you're talking about senior issues, you're definitely talking about those items. Here's a question I get all the time, because you're all, longstanding members of the community. You all probably know each other before you were commissioners. Let's say you're all at a holiday party together. Do you have to all be like, oh my gosh, Brown Act, we can't all be here? No. As long as you're not talking about subject matter jurisdiction of your commission, you're fine. So you can go to a holiday party all together. You can talk about your kids. You can talk about the Warriors. You can talk about the Niners. You can talk about whatever you want. Except, if you suddenly go, hey, we got that thing coming up in January. We better get to work on it. What do you think? Boom, you violated the Brown Act at the holiday party. Okay. So what I always tell people is talk about the weather, talk about your favorite TV show, talk about your movie. Just because you're all in the same room together doesn't mean you're violating the Brown Act. But as soon as you start talking about something about your commission, somebody should slam on the brakes and say, let's go get a drink instead, and just cut it off. Okay? All right. So all meetings have to be properly agendized and noticed so that the public has a chance to hear and comment on the items being discussed. And commissioners may not hear, discuss, deliberate, or take any action on any items under the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission outside a formally agendized and noticed meeting. I took this word for word from the government code because I'm a lawyer, and if I don't cite something from the law, they'll take away my bar card. So you don't need to memorize this, but that's from the government code. But all kidding aside, this is important. It's important for you all to kind of absorb this and remember it and see it not as a limitation, but sort of an affirmation of where you have come by being appointed a commissioner. Remember what I told you about Mr. Brown. He's not about stifling your opinions. He wants to make sure everyone can hear your opinion. So until you're at a meeting that's been properly agendized and noticed so that every single person in the city of Davis has a chance to walk down to your meeting, log into the Zoom meeting and hear what you have to say, you're not allowed to really talk about it because you've been chosen to be sort of a representative for the people, and your opinions are what are going to shape the policy and basically the future of this city. And so people want to be able to hear that and criticize it or praise it if they can. And that's why we do it, okay? Here's an example. I have two examples for you today. This is the first one. And these are not real commissions and these are not real commissioners. So if there is the real commissioner here from this hypo, I apologize to him in advance. The Commission on Fair Treatment of Roadrunners is planning to discuss a ban on anvils in city parks. Commissioner Wiley E. Coyote prepares a written memo that outlines his concerns about the plan and circulates it via email to his fellow commissioners, asking for their thoughts. You know, because Commissioner Coyote has a very strong interest in anvils. For those of you who grew up at a certain time period, you know coyotes like anvils, okay? Did he violate the Brown Act? Gonna give you a minute to think about it. I see some thumbs, I see some hands. So I like the participation, it's great, it means that I haven't put you to sleep yet. Is what Commissioner Coyote did by preparing a written memo that outlines his concerns and circulating it via email to his fellow council members, asking for their thoughts, a Brown Act violation? The answer is yes. Okay, and here's why. The memo seeks discussion and deliberation outside a properly noticed meeting. He's circulating it to his fellow commissioners without the public knowing about it, right? Think about it. If the public would never know that this memo exists, would never know that the commissioners had this discussion, and that's not what your role as commissioners is. Your role is to be the voice for the community and let them hear your wisdom and then either criticize it or approve it. The public can hear the discussion, and because of that, Commissioner Coyote should send his memo to staff, should ask staff to include that on the record for the next meeting, usually put it in the agenda packet, add it to the packet so that then everybody can download it and read it. Here's a question, and I'm not being facetious and I'm not trying to cast aspersions at anyone. If you've done this, I know a lot of good commissioners and people I respect highly. When we all first became commissioners, this is something people say. People asked, well, what if I want to say something that I don't want other people to know about? It's a fair question, right? In private life, we get to do that all the time, right? I can say, hey, Jim Kramer, I don't know, Jim, I see him on the screen here. Jim Kramer, I got a secret. I think this anvil thing is a stupid idea. It's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. It's going to put the anvil industry out of business. But I don't want anyone to know that because I may want to run for council one day and I need the anvil lobby to, make donations to me if I run for council. Well, guess what? When we're commissioners, we no longer have that luxury. Everything we say, everything we do related to our subject matter jurisdiction is open to public scrutiny. We owe it to the residents of the community. So if I really think that the anvils are a stupid idea, or if Commissioner Coyote thinks it's a stupid idea, he has to have the courage of his convictions to put it out there and say, this is a dumb idea. That's what commissioners do, because you're helping to shape policy and the community gets to hear that whether you like it or not. So, all right, there we go. Don't ever know what happened to the anvil ban. I'm hoping in Davis you don't have that problem. It's more a desert community type of thing, so you shouldn't have that problem. What is an illegal serial meeting? Okay. Serial meetings are illegal. When I first became a commissioner, I had young twin girls. They were like newborns. And I literally went through like the first month of training where they told you no cereal meetings, and I didn't get to have the meeting. I literally was like, cereal? Like, what kind of cereal? Like, you can't eat certain kind of cereal? I'm not lying. I'm a lawyer, and I'm probably not giving much confidence to being the city attorney for Davis, but I literally spent the first month as a commissioner going like, why can't we eat cereal at a meeting? I don't understand that. No, cereal meetings mean like serial killer, serial chain. It's a series of direct or indirect communications through intermediaries by a majority of the body to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any business or potential business. It's easier to explain what a serial meeting is by giving you examples. So the first type of serial meeting is what's called a hub and spoke meeting. You've got Commissioner A who calls Commissioner B and says, hey, Commissioner B, what do you think? Then Commissioner A hangs up the phone, calls up Commissioner C and says, hey, what do you think? Hangs up the phone, calls Commissioner D and says, hey, what do you think? That is a serial meeting because Commissioner A now knows the thoughts and opinions of B, C, and D and has had a discussion with the majority of the commission without the public ever knowing about it. Doesn't even matter if they say, B told me that she likes it. What do you think about that, C? That makes it even worse, okay? But even just saying, hey, what do you think, basically creates a hub and spoke serial meeting, which is a violation of the Brown Act. So the tip to avoid a hub and spoke meeting is on any issue in your subject matter jurisdiction. My tip to you is never talk about it with any other commissioner, ever. Now you're going to say, well, David, as long as I talk to just one other person. Yeah, but see, you always want to give yourself some wiggle room, right? Because I was not smart enough to remember what I talked to Ron Cole about on any given situation. So if I talk to Ron and that's my one, then I accidentally go and I talk to Angela Wilson about it. Now I've talked to two and I'm like, I violated the Brown Act. So my tip to all of you is just don't talk to anyone about it until you get to a public meeting. Saves you a lot of muss and fuss, right? Okay, because hub and spoke, if you go to a majority, boom, you're in trouble, okay? Same thing goes if the commissioner goes to staff, okay? So there's nothing wrong with going to staff and saying, hey, what do you think of this? Is this going to be part of the agenda? Are we going to talk about that? That's fine, but you got to be careful that you then don't tell everybody else, oh, hey, I talked to staff and we're going to do this. Oh, you just violated the Brown Act, okay? Or you talk to, let's say, staff, and I know staff would never do this, but staff are human too. And they sometimes are working in so many different directions, they lose track. So they talk to you, and then Jillian Core calls the same staff member, and the staff member just has a moment, right? Not doing it on purpose, but they said, oh, I talked to David and David said this. Oh no, now there's two of you in it. And if that staff member talks to one other person. So let's support our great staff because staff is awesome. They got our back. Let's not put them in that situation. So I always advise too, that when it comes to staff, you kind of be very careful. Sometimes you need to know just procedurally what's going to happen at a meeting. You want to know if a certain email came in, that's all fine. But avoid giving your opinion about it. Avoid, telling them things. Send them memos if you want it added to the record, but be very careful about a back and forth. If the staff starts to tell you what another commissioner said, you should be like, no, don't say that. Okay. So those are hub and spoke. I'm going to take all that away. The second type of serial meeting is a chain meeting, or I never called it a chain meeting. I always called it the telephone game conversation, because that's how I grew up. I was a summer camp counselor in college. And we would always play the telephone game, right? Where I whisper to Inder, Inder whispers to Brian, Brian whispers to Mark whispers to Ali. And the first thing I said was, monkeys like bananas. And it comes out, green, purple dinosaurs, stomped on the roof. It's like, what? How did that get down the chain? Okay. A chain meeting is just that. A tells B, B tells C, C tells D. That becomes a Brown Act violation. And you can see here now the danger of talking to just one person, because when you talk to just one person, you don't know what that one person is going to do. So if I talk to Mary Bliss and I say, okay, Mary, don't talk to anyone else about it. Mary's like, mum's the word, Dave. It's just the two of us, man. I got your back. And then Mary sees Larry Gunther and they happen to be talking, and Mary forgets and says, oh, we're going to do this about the meeting. And she just forgot. that she'd talk to me about it. Guess what? We're all in trouble. All three of us have just violated the Brown Act. Not intentionally. We had the best intention. We're just trying to do our job, but we violated the Brown Act. Okay. So remember my tip. Just don't talk to any other commissioner about anything related to subject matter jurisdiction. Talk to them about sports, talk to them about the movies, anything else, but don't talk to them about subject matter jurisdiction until when? Till you're in a noticed agendized meeting. Here's my second example for the night. The Parks and Recs Commission is considering, oh, and I have to say too, we are the only city that I've ever seen. We're called the Recreation and Park Commission. Go look up, if you're ever bored, go to every other city in California, it's the Park and Recreation Commission. So that threw me for a loop when I started working here. I was like, wow, that's cool, Recreation and Park, I like it. So the Recreation and Park Commission is considering a ban on hunting rabbits. The item is agendized and scheduled for next Tuesday. Commissioner Daffy Duck sends a lengthy email to his fellow commissioners outlining his thoughts on the matter and also calls and emails various commissioners to discuss the issue. Is this a violation of the Brown Act? Did Commissioner Duck violate the Brown Act? Yeah, the answer is an unequivocal yes. He went too far. Whoops, what happened? Sorry, I somehow took myself back to the beginning of the slide. Give me a second. Okay. Yes, it's a violation of the Brown Act. It's a serial meeting because he hub and spoke. It's possibly a chain meeting if somebody goes and starts talking to somebody else about what Commissioner Duck said. Oops, and I put Commissioner Coyote because I was fixated on Wile E. Coyote. Commissioner Duck should send his memo to staff to have it added to the record for discussion at the meeting. I'm hoping you're seeing a trend here. If you have something to say, if you have an opinion before the meeting, there are two options that I think are best suited for you. Is one, keep it to yourself until you get to the meeting so that the public has the benefit of hearing what you say, or send any memos or writings to staff saying, here's some thoughts I have, can we have it added to the agenda so that it can be published with the notice of the meeting so that the public has a chance to review it and comment on it before the meeting, okay? Now, here's another thing that I'm gonna say, it's come to mind, and maybe it's not in your minds because maybe you're better commissioners than I was, but this thought came to mind because I was on the Community Relations Commission. We handled CDBG grants and affordable housing issues and social justice issues. And there were literally like months of meetings at a time where no one showed up, like just no one. It'd be the five of us sitting in this room and no one showed up. And we'd read out, okay, now's the time for public comment. Anyone final comment? And we'd looking at each other like there's no one here. And the thought will cross your mind at some point to say, well, does it really matter if no one's showing up, David? I mean, really, who's going to know? The answer is yes, it matters a great deal because we're not saying that the public has to listen and hear, but we must give them every opportunity. So even if you're in a commission, and I know it can be demoralizing sometimes, it can seem like an incredible waste of time that you got to hold your tongue to go to a meeting where nobody shows up and you figure, why did David tell me to do that? Well, we could have solved this a long time earlier and not have to sit there through a 2-hour meeting where we all have to wait to say our point of view. We could have just all met for coffee at Starbucks, got this hashed out on our own convenient time. Doesn't work that way. Even if the public chooses not to participate, they must be given the opportunity to come hear what we have to say. Okay. So here's something Mr. Brown never thought of. Mr. Brown did not live in the age of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, right? Where you could go and read an article in the Vanguard and then click a comment and type a comment on the bottom, right? And so it's easy to say, well, Mr. Brown is wrong because he never anticipated this and we live in a more representative digital age. Well, the state legislature has taken care of that for us. They have given us some guidance that expands the Brown Act, that tells us as commissioners what we need to do here in the digital age. You got to be very careful about group emails and texts, about comment sections and social media, okay? My tip for group emails is commissioners should never be sending group emails to each other or group texts, ever, okay? Staff will send you emails if there's things that you all need to know about upcoming meetings, agendas. But mass emails, when I was on the city council, never sent a mass email ever in my 8 years to the whole council, because I knew it was just fraught with danger. And again, you may have like the best interest where you just may be like, hey, we're going to have a barbecue, everyone's invited. But what you don't want is somebody to hit reply all and be like, and while we're at it, we can talk about, what a jackass that transit agency, Caltrans, is and not helping us, clear our freeway off ramps. Oh, geez. Now we got to fix that. Okay. So no group emails, no group texts. Comment sections, you got to be careful what you put in a comment section, because you don't know if your fellow council members are reading those things. And if a fellow council member likes what you had to say or says, I disagree completely, and we're going to talk about this at our next meeting. Well, that comment section is not noticed in public to the rest of the community. And so they don't have an option to find it. And so it's a violation of the Brown Act. Same thing for social media. So there's a new government code. It just came into effect this year. It's 54952.2. Basically says that a commissioner, anybody subject to the Brown Act, should not respond directly to any communication on an internet-based social media platform regarding a matter that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body that is made, posted, or shared by any other member of the legislative body. This one is tricky too, because this one doesn't say that it has to be a majority. It just means if one other commissioner responds or comments to a communication by another commissioner to something in the subject matter jurisdiction, you both are in violation of the Brown Act. Okay. So again, my tip to all of you, don't respond to fellow council member posts on social media at all. Now, here's something that came up when I was a commissioner, and we as commissioners used to talk about it a lot. Let's say Eric Gelber comes up to me and says, well, wait a minute, David, I following my council members, and even the ones I like, and they got Twitter accounts and they're popping off about all sorts of things. They got Facebook pages and they're putting like, we did this great thing. That is their prerogative as an elected official. But even then, I caution elected officials to not talk about matters that have not yet come before them. As a council member, I waited until after we took action on a matter before I posted about it, for the very reason that I did not want anyone to think that I was prejudging or discussing an issue with a member of the council. And frankly, I didn't want to put my other council members in the awkward position of having them accidentally like something where I put, tonight we're going to vote on transit-oriented development project. I'm fully in favor of it, which number one, I shouldn't have done. Okay. But I don't want a council member to say, right on, David, let's go get it, before we have a chance to deliberate. So you may see council members tweeting, putting stuff up there. They have slightly different rules, but not really much. My advice to them would be the same, like don't post anything about pending action until you've had a chance to discuss it and deliberate on it. And definitely do not respond to anything that someone puts up. So if Michael French puts something on media, fellow commissioners should not ever comment, like it, okay? All right, so that's the Internet-Based Social Media Platform Act. So based on that, these are my guidance to all of you. Again, trying not to be a wet blanket, but following best governance practices. Basic, easiest thing is don't make, post, or share communications between members of the legislative bodies. Don't follow each other on social media. I know that sounds incredibly harsh, but while you're sitting on a commission together, I would just unfriend each other. Like unfriend in the social media sense. Like I think you can see each other in public. You can talk about your grandchildren, your children, but avoid the temptation of seeing each other on social media. And I did that. When I was a council member, I unfriended all of my fellow council members. I unfriended any commissioner that I knew. I just didn't want them there. I secured my Facebook site so that it was private, only to my posts. I put up a lot of cute baby pictures, and that was about it for the 8 years. I stayed away from anything political on my social media pages. And like I said, my Twitter page was just stuff we already did or stuff that was going on in the community. Okay. Now, it is okay to answer questions, provide information to the public, or to solicit information from the public regarding a matter that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body. So, for example, if someone's like, when is the meeting? Like, what time is the meeting? Where is it going to be held at? That's fine. But it sort of goes against my tip that I honestly, and I know it sounds harsh, I just wouldn't post anything on social media. I'd say staff, hey, they got this question, staff. Can you go ahead and answer that? But it is okay if you want to do these things. All right, let's see. Tips for electronic communication. I already talked about this, so we're not going to go into it. Don't hit reply all. Don't communicate to the entire group. Don't solicit responses from other people when staff sends you information. Just kind of take it, absorb it, think about it. Don't avoid the temptation to reach out electronically to everybody and be like, what do y'all think? What are we going to do? Wait until the meeting. Remember, hear Ralph Brown's voice echoing in your ears. I was not here to be efficient. I don't care that you're going to spend 3 hours talking about this next Wednesday. We have to give the people the right to hear it. Okay, remember that and you'll feel better. Or at least you'll be able to explain to your spouse why these meetings are taking so long. Okay, please don't ever BCC people, blind carbon copy, right? Where you're like, oh, if nobody knows that I sent it to them. Nothing, as we all know, I'm sure you all told your kids, your grandkids this, everything you do in social media is permanent. There's no such thing as a real blind carbon copy. You can drill down and find who you sent it to. Deliberations must occur publicly on the dais, not by text or on social media. All right. Very quickly, individual briefings are okay. So I do want to, this is the law, so I want to tell you that, if you want to just tell one other commissioner what happened at a meeting or what took place and it's one way unidirectional and doesn't describe the views of any member, doesn't ask about other members' views, that's legally, technically okay, right? I still urge a ton of caution. And I just urge, my practice was not even to do this because again, it's a slippery slope. You talk to, if I tell Tracy Reynolds something and she, how do I say this? You guys are the best of the best. You became commissioners because you care deeply about these issues. You care deeply about your community, right? You're not just like, I could take it or leave it. I don't really care. If that was your attitude, you wouldn't be a commissioner, right? So because we care so deeply about our community, chances are that when somebody tells you something and says, don't respond to this, you're going to want to respond because you're awesome people. You're all about community. You're all about, affecting change and doing good things. You're going to want to respond. So what I always tell people is don't even tempt your friends, your fellow commissioners to do that because they're going to want to say something, and wait till the meeting when you can all say it and the community can hear about it. Okay, but you can legally talk to one person as long as they don't respond, they don't ask any questions, and you don't give them the opinion of what you're talking about. Okay. Other exceptions to the Brown Act is you can have individual contacts with people. I gave you the example of a holiday party, conferences and seminars. This training, for example, League of Cities has some very awesome trainings that hopefully you'll get to go to at some point. Those are fine. Your council may hold a retreat for all of you. Those will be fine because those will be cleared by staff and they'll talk about certain stuff in the seminar. Community meetings, okay? Like if the city council is having a study session on something along the railroad tracks and you want to go, you can go. And if you see a fellow commissioner in there, you don't have to turn around and walk out of the room, but I urge, just don't talk about anything, right? I wouldn't even talk about what you're there to talk about, to listen to, even if it's not within your subject matter jurisdiction. If it's in your subject matter jurisdiction, then you probably are at a joint study session, but you shouldn't talk about it. So if you see another commissioner in a room, don't just turn around and walk out and be like, David said, I can't be in the room with you. We used to get that all the time with parties, retirement parties. New commissioners would be like, oh, I didn't go to the retirement party for the fire captain because I went in the room and there were 3 other commissioners and we felt so bad because, they missed a good party. So yeah, gatherings are okay. Other agency meetings. So if you go to a board of supervisor meeting, again, as long as you guys are there and you're not talking about your subject matter jurisdiction, you're fine. You can even sit next to each other. Like, I don't want people to think I'm telling you, like, you have to act like you've all got like, disease or something. You can sit next to each other. Just be very careful about not talking about subject matter jurisdiction. Social ceremonial events I covered, ad hoc meeting committees we've covered, observations of standing committee meetings is fine. That one, legally you're fine, right? So let's say there's 2 of you in a standing committee and 3 other council members. Let's say, Donna and Sherry are in a ad hoc or a standing committee meeting and the 3 other commissioners want to go watch it. yeah, you can do it. I still urge caution because it just looks weird. I'm not going to lie. It just looks weird. If you're on the outside looking in, you're like, why are all these commissioners meeting? What's going on? So legal, but I urge caution. Now, what rules apply to meetings? So meetings must be noticed, must be public, and they must give the public an opportunity to comment. So most of this will be covered by staff, right? They'll notice the meeting, they'll make sure it gets published, they'll make sure that the meetings are open to the public, and they'll call for public comment. So you're not going to have to really worry about much of this. Same thing, agendas need to be posted 72 hours in advance. You're never going to have to post this. And it has to have a brief description, and posted agendas must be freely accessible to the public. The only reason this is kind of good for you all to know, and I was glad when I learned it, is it kind of explains why staff is always saying, can you get it to us a little earlier? It's not because they're trying to make your life harder. It's because they have certain legal deadlines of when they can publish something. And if it doesn't get posted and published within a certain period of time, then it's technically not agendized, and technically you may not be able to talk about it, right? So if you have something you want to talk about, you need to let your staff know ASAP so that they can decide, can we get it on the agenda within the 72-hour period? And can we describe it completely? There will be times where you'll want to talk about something and you'll be told, no, we can't talk about that right now because it wasn't agendized. And I'm sure you've all probably seen that by now, if you've been around for any period of time. That's sort of why this happens, okay? Remember the voice of Mr. Brown when that happens. He doesn't care about being fast. He cares about being thorough and making sure the public has a right to hear us. Special meetings, most commissions do not ever do special meetings. So I'll just let you look at this picture of the dogs real quickly. Just special meetings are special. And if you run into a point where you want to have a special meeting, talk to your staff member who can then talk to us about calling a special meeting. But special meetings for commissions are very rare. Same thing with adjourned meeting. Now we're sort of getting into like Robert's Rules of Orders, which I bet you there's at least 5 people here who know Robert's Rules of Orders better, or at least as good as me. Those are the standard procedures by which you are supposed to hold a meeting. Nowadays, most bodies don't use it. They use a modified form called Rosenberg's Rules of Orders, which are a lot more sane. But adjourned meetings, if you get to a point where you need to adjourn a meeting, then you should lean on staff heavily and they can come talk to us, okay? But remember that you always you need a quorum. So if you've only got 3 people out of 5 and one of them has to leave to go pick up their kid from Little League, you got to stop the meeting, okay? That's honestly the most realistic thing that ever happens, is somebody has to go somewhere and they need to leave and you lose your quorum. And staff will usually pick up on that and say, whoa, we only have 2 people here. We got to stop, okay? Other agenda requirements, teleconference locations are fine. Zoom meetings, I'm sure you've all been doing them over the last year. So this used to be a lot like sexier and teleconference. Now we're all like, please, when can we meet each other again? We're kind of tired of teleconferencing, but it used to be a lot more confusing to people, okay? So as long as everything's posted, telecommuting or Zoom meetings are fine. There's an exception for items not on the agenda that can be discussed if you meet certain requirements. Again, I'm going to not tempt you with this one because in my entire time on commissions and councils, we never did this. Like there was never anything so important that we said, just because it wasn't agendized, we're going to do this 2/3 vote and we need to take action immediately. We always punted it to the next meeting because it's just safer. You're going to get a legal challenge if you try to do this. I mean, this is kind of like, I can't even really think of why you would do this. I guess like if there was a, some life or death thing bearing down, like if Godzilla was bearing down on the town and you needed to pass an ordinance to evacuate the city, maybe you would do it, but then I would question your judgment and even try and hold that vote. I would just run. Who cares about the resolution at that point? So I cannot really think of any reason to do that, okay? Now, very important, because I don't want people to get too wrapped up in the Brown Act. 2 exceptions to the Brown Act are okay. Brief responses to public comments, even if they're not agendized, are fine. Questions or clarification and referring to staff are also fine. So if somebody comes up on public comment and they start talking about something that has nothing to do with anything. So let's say you're discussing the Anvil situation and somebody comes and says, Forget the anvil situation. There's birdseed all over the road. I want to talk about somebody sweeping up this birdseed, and nobody has talked about birdseed. It's not agendized. It's okay to say, we're not here to talk about birdseed right now, but we're going to refer you to staff and they can follow up with you. Okay. So you don't have to just sit mute. I have seen in my experience where commissioners sometimes, and even council members will say, we can't answer that. We can't even talk to you because this was not on the agenda. Okay, you can refer them to staff. What I always tell people is Mr. Brown was also polite. So you can say polite questions, but avoid saying, I completely agree with that birdseed problem and I think we should have a resolution to fix it. Don't do that. Just say, what, it's not on the agenda. We're going to refer you to staff and we'll go from there. Same thing as if they, let's say the birdseed issue was already agendized for 2 meetings, 2 weeks from now. You can say, Ms. Khalsa, thank you for bringing up that very important issue. Just so you know, it's going to be on the agenda in about 2 weeks or, in 6 months from now, we're doing a study session on it. And so we are going to address the issue. That's fine. Okay. Brief announcements, reports. A lot of commissions do that. That's fine. Request for a future report, agreeing to place items on for a future agenda. Those are all fine. Okay. Public comments. Okay. These are my last set of 5 slides for you that I'm going to turn it over to Inder to discuss due process. Public comments at meetings. The public has an absolute right to speak on any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body and a specific item of business on the agenda at any meeting. Okay. They have a right to speak. Very important. You cannot prohibit criticism. Anything that a person says at a meeting is privileged. You are allowed to put reasonable restrictions on time limits, speaker cards, rules of decorum, and you are allowed to record it. So a couple things about that. So time limits, and staff will guide you on this. Generally, you should announce the time limit at the beginning. You don't want to start at 5 minutes and then realize later that, there's like 50 people here. I'm going to reduce it to 2. You can't start at 5 and then drop to 2. So you got to kind of read the room and be like, what I used to do when I was the mayor and presiding over meetings, I'd ask the clerk before we started, I'm like, how many speaker slips do we have so far? Or how many do we think we're going to get if we had a hot item? And then I'd kind of, say there's 50 speaker slips. And I'd kind of times that by 5 and be like, that's 250 minutes. That's 4 hours. That's over 4 hours. Right. So then you're like, okay, 2 minutes. Right. But you do it up front so that everybody has an equal opportunity to be heard. Speaker cards, they don't have to tell you who they are, where they live. They can just come and speak. They don't have to announce who they are at all. You can ask for speaker cards, but if they decline, you can't kick them. You can't not let them speak because they declined to fill out a speaker card. That's another trap that new commissioners fall into. It's like, no, you didn't fill out a speaker card. No speaking for you. Let them speak. The other thing is rules of decorum. They don't get to just, call you racist names or use foul swear words. But here's my tip, and this is going to pain some of you because I had it happen to me. I was subject to racist remarks from time to time, mostly from people who probably mentally were not in the right place. But, you don't want to be called a racist name. It's never fun. But honestly, I kind of was like, that's sort of what I signed up for when I, became a commissioner or a council member. You take on the role of a public official. And so I had to kind of let him do it, and I don't think it's weak. I think it's a measure of strength that, I'm a representative of the government and our government can take those slings and arrows. You're not attacking me, you're attacking the institution. So go ahead, have at it. I let people speak. I let them go for the full 2 minutes. And then as soon as the 2 minutes was up, I cut them off. They're done. Okay. But I kind of let them go because you don't want to cut someone off because it's very hard. Sometimes they'll say things that you absolutely disagree with, and you got to just let them go. I'll share a secret with you. Can't ever tell anybody, even though we're recording this and now everyone will know, but I'm no longer running for office. I have no political ambition. So I can tell you, it's a very easy trick. If you don't like what they have to say, just hum a song in your head. Literally, you got a timer in front of you. Just I would always look over their head, right over their head at something behind them on the wall. So it looked like I was looking at them and paying attention. And then I would just start singing like a favorite TV show song. I love 70s TV sitcoms. So I'd sing like the Jeffersons theme song in my head over and over and over again until they were done. And they'd be spewing off, calling me stupid, calling me racist, vile things. And I'd just, the humming the Jeffersons, they think I'm looking at them. I'm not looking at them. And then when the 2 minutes was up, you know what I did? Say, thank you. Next. Done. Okay. That one was free. That's a free tip for you. Closed sessions, we're not going to talk about that. Enforcement and consequences. So this is kind of the serious part. Don't want to scare you, but you do all need to know as commissioners what can be the consequences if you violate the Brown Act, if you cut somebody off before their 2 to 3 minutes is up. They can bring a civil action to the district attorney or to the courts to get the decision invalidated. Now, in most cases, you'll be given a notice and an opportunity to cure, which means you'll have to re-agendize, rediscuss the issue, and re-vote on it. And as commissioners, this can have huge consequences because if you made a recommendation that went up to council and then council acted on that, and then you get a Brown Act challenge to something we did as commissioners, guess what? The council's actions gets invalidated. It needs to come back. You need to correct and cure your action and then need to resend it to the council. And the council's not going to like that, right? Nobody's going to like that. So be very careful. If you refuse to cure it or decline to cure it, there can be subsequent court action and the city can be charged with recovery for attorney's fees and costs from the person who brought the challenge. So this does have some very serious consequences of violating the Brown Act. And the other thing I'll tell you as a tip is the city of Davis is very much similar in size to the city of San Mateo. Everybody knows everybody. So you may think that no one's ever going to find out that you had a conversation. And if you're anything like San Mateo, and I know you are because you're an awesome community, there's someone sitting in that coffee shop when you guys are talking. there just is. And it's always at the time when you think no one is listening, okay? Or somebody has a friend who goes to school with somebody and their kids are in the Boy Scout troop together and you didn't know they were in the Boy Scout troop together and they find out that you sent an email to a fellow commissioner. Small community, okay? The worst case, I don't want to oversell this, but in the worst case, if you are found to have taken action in violation of the Brown Act with the intent to deprive the public of information, that can be charged as a misdemeanor by the district attorney. I will tell you in my 20 years as a DA in Alameda County, we never charged any commissioner or city official with this because most of us are good, earnest, hardworking people. You only hear about these sorts of charges usually in corruption cases. It usually has to do with money where somebody is getting kickbacks to make a decision. And if you are that type of person, there's no way you voluntarily logged on today to hear this training. You're like, I'm not doing that training. I'm going to go get my kickbacks. I'm kidding. Nobody in Davis is getting kickbacks, but I want to make sure that you're not all leaving here scared thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be charged if I violated the Brown Act. No. As long as you're not doing it willfully, honest mistakes happen. It will happen at some point. You'll send an email and you'll think later, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. I don't want you going to sleep thinking, David said I'm going to get arrested and charged with a crime. No. Okay. I just legally have to tell you what the consequences are. Okay, here is the last thing, and then I'm handing it over to Inder. This was the Coliseum Commission down in Los Angeles. They had a bunch of closed door deliberations, again, on a taxpayer-owned stadium. They got challenged. It went up to the Superior Court, and they were basically hammered with fines. They were publicly shamed. They had to unroll everything. It cost millions of dollars. So in addition to remembering everything Mr. Brown told us, we never want to be like the Coliseum Commission. Okay. All right. That's it for me. Thank you, everybody. You can email Zoe any questions you have for me. I'm going to turn it over to Inder at this point, and she's going to talk about due process.
Sure. Thank you, David. I know you commissioners have a hard stop here in a meeting that you're heading into, and I'd love it if you had a few minutes to stretch your legs in between. So I'll just say next slide, David, and we'll just progress like that. So next slide. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the due process clause tonight. And if I'm rushing through this a little bit, then I will stop and pause on it a little more when we talk about conflicts of interest, because there's a little bit of overlap between. So I'm sure you're familiar with the due process clause that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Here in city government, we generally aren't dealing, thank goodness, with anyone's lives or liberty. That is with the courts, but we do make a lot of decisions that have to do with property. Next slide, please. So when is due process implicated in the kinds of work that we do? Anytime you are dealing with a land use application, a conditional use permit or design review, some of you commissioners may occasionally deal with license issuance and revocation questions. And then I know we have a personnel board that looks at disciplining employees, and under California law, your public employment is considered a property right. Next slide. So it's important here to back up and to look at the two different kinds of actions that local governments take. And the first kind is legislative actions, and the second are what we call quasi-judicial actions. Legislative actions are big picture decisions, and that would include citywide policies or policies that impact numerous people, the adoption of laws, policies for the departments of the city, our decisions about how we use city property and parks and that kind of thing are all legislative decisions. Zoning and general plan is all in the legislative category. In contrast, quasi-judicial decisions are kind of what they sound like, which is as commissioners, you're actually sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity and acting almost as a judge would in a decision that has to do more with one person or a couple of people, and generally involves application of the law to a specific set of facts. So in those situations, you'll have one applicant who may be a person or a couple or an organization coming to the city and asking for something that impacts their property values for the land that they own, or in the case of a city employee, something that impacts their job, or someone applying for a license or a permit. In those situations, you are considered a quasi-judicial official, and so you have to be impartial in those decisions, whereas on the legislative side, your discretion is less limited. Next slide. So here's a couple of examples. A legislative action would be, for example, here's our downtown specific plan. The downtown specific plan is a legislative action. Note that it does impact property, right? The property owners downtown may be impacted by decisions in that document, but because it impacts a large number of property owners all at once, it's considered legislative. A quasi-judicial decision, on the other hand, would be a specific project that's coming before you. Next slide. So legislative decisions are often on the agenda as new business. They're often not agendized as public hearings. They may be on consent. The commissioners, you have wide discretion in developing your recommendations to council. While it's always good to listen to community input before you come to the meeting more than you're talking, there's no legal limitation on expressing your point of view or opinions about legislative matters that are coming before your commission. And there are no due process requirements. Next slide. In contrast, when you're sitting in that quasi-judicial capacity, you will be somewhat limited and constrained in what you can do. You will be applying the city's code and the existing law to a specific scenario that will be presented to you. You will have an applicant and potentially opponents to a project who have due process rights because the project impacts their property values at a much greater degree than anyone else's. You will often be required to make findings that support your decision. You will be asked to make a decision that is based on the evidence in the record that is presented to you at the hearing. And if you've heard, viewpoints from the community or have gotten evidence from some other source, you'll be asked to disclose it. And finally, you will be asked to be a quote unquote impartial decision maker. Next slide. So here's my hypo. I just blatantly stole David's because it was at the last minute and his were so good. So the the Rec and Parks Commission is considering a ban on hunting rabbits citywide. This citywide ban would be a legislative action. And so you would be able to express your point of view on it and express your opinions and talk about it in the community. Again, of course, we would always recommend that you be circumspect about sharing your viewpoint before you come into the meeting, and certainly avoid any Brown Act violations. But this would be considered a legislative item, and you would not be expected to be fully impartial as a decision maker. What if instead of banning hunting, and all of this is, of course, unlikely to ever come up in the context of Davis. Instead of banning hunting in the parks, you decided to issue permits for hunting, and Elmer Fudd wanted to apply for one. Okay, so when you're looking at whether or not Elmer Fudd should get a permit, does he meet the requirements, etc., that would be a quasi-judicial decision. Elmer has a property interest in his permit, and when he comes to you, he expects you to act impartially and to apply the law or the requirements to his situation without bias. Next slide. So what does due process require from you? A lot of this has been covered under the Brown Act, and there's a lot of overlap in these governmental laws that helps to make sure that we're always in good stead with all of the sort of different and intersecting requirements. So one of the fundamental requirements for due process is notice and an opportunity to be heard. And those are largely covered by the Brown Act procedures that David's already talked about. The final one we need to address in a little more detail, which is being an impartial decision maker. Next slide. Here's a little bit that you can look at later about how quasi-judicial hearings may be noticed differently than the new business items that are legislative. Most of this will be familiar to you. Next slide. So as an impartial decision maker, when you're making in a quasi-judicial capacity as a commissioner, you will be allowed to have general opinions, but it will be expected that you won't allow your opinions to color your judgment at the hearing. You will be expected to make your decision based on the evidence that is presented to you at that hearing, and not based on evidence that you've heard elsewhere or any prejudice or bias that you may be carrying with you into the meeting. Next slide. So again, opinions are allowed, bias is not. Next slide. So one of the cases we frequently raise in the context of bias, because it's a really useful case and somewhat unsettling, is the Nasha case. And that case dealt with a planning commissioner who was about to hear an application that was going to have some mitigation measures on nearby open space. And the planning commissioner wrote an article that was actually anonymously posted for his homeowners association newsletter and said, and I don't think this is a super strong statement of opinion, and that's why this case is, I think, unsettling and extremely important. He said he thought it could be a threat to the wildlife corridor, the pending project, the one that he was going to be acting on. The court here decided that he really should have recused himself because that statement that was published anonymously indicated that he had prejudged the matter, and they found that there was an unacceptable probability of bias here. And I think why this case is so instructive is that even a fairly mild statement of concern about a project can lead to a commissioner being asked to recuse from an item, or later the decision being invalidated because the commissioner participated. So if we as city attorney hear that a commissioner has published statements in opposition or in support of a project that's pending before them, we will usually send them an email that says, having stated that publicly, we really need you now to recuse from the decision-making process because we're afraid that your statements might be seen to be biased, and therefore you could invalidate the final decision. So one lesson I just want to take away from this, kind of getting to David's practical tips, is if you want to participate as a commissioner in the decision-making process with respect to one of these items that's coming before you, that's quasi-judicial, like a land use project or a license application or anything like that, stay quiet about the project in your public statements previous. And if anyone comes up to you in the grocery store and says, you're going to vote no on that, aren't you? ? You need to have, it's helpful to have a script to respond something along the lines of, I won't make my decision until I've heard everything that both sides have had to say at the hearing, but thank you so much for your thoughts, and I really appreciate it, and have a nice day. But I can't make a decision until I've heard all of the evidence that's presented to me at the hearing. I cannot express opinions about items that are coming before me because I have to be impartial. Next slide. There's a big carve out for this that we don't need to get into in any depth, but if you are running for council, there is a big exception to this. You are allowed to make exactly the kinds of statements that I just noted would be inappropriate and require you to recuse if you are running for election. And the reason for that is that the courts have felt that it's more important that the electorate understand your point of view about issues in the community than the bias rules that we've been discussing up to this point. More important that you have the ability to exercise your free speech as a candidate than the applicant's due process. This is the one and only exception to this rule. Next slide. Another item that sometimes comes up is you may talk to people in the community about a pending project before you go into the commission meeting to make your final decision. In fact, in many cases, if the project is controversial, you probably can't help but hear about it in the community before you go into the meeting. At the beginning of a quasi-judicial hearing, you may have staff ask you, or you may want to, if you didn't hear the question, just volunteer it yourself. You should mention any what we call ex parte, meaning outside of the courtroom, outside of the chambers, conversations that you had with applicants or opponents, and share any evidence that you've heard before you go into deliberations. And so usually that's just very simple. I did a project, I walked the site of the proposed project. I spoke with the project proponent. I spoke with several opponents to the project. Thank you very much. Now we can deliberate. And the idea there is that you shouldn't be making your decision based on evidence that isn't in that hearing that night. And if there was evidence that you received outside of the hearing, you should disclose that. Next slide. So this is the final slide for you, and thank you so much for your patience, and sorry for running a bit over. There's a lot of content even in the shorter presentation. In general, if you're wondering whether or not you can fairly participate because you have a very strong viewpoint about a project, feel free to reach out to me. When in doubt, recuse and don't participate. If you have a relationship with an applicant that's been very hostile and everyone knows it, you know, the applicant is your nemesis and enemy, and you just don't feel like you can be fair, the best course of action would be to recuse yourself. Make your decision based on the evidence that's presented to you at the hearing, and don't allow conversations that are happening outside the hearing to color your judgment or prevent you from hearing the evidence that's being presented to you in that appropriate context. And as long as you do that, you should stay well out of trouble. But if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to Zoe or to my office, and we'd be happy to help you. That's what we're here for. And I think we probably don't have time for questions, but I hope that at least some of you have sent an email to Zoe, and I will respond to your questions via email. And in the meantime, I'll let you guys take a break before your next meeting. And thank you all so much.
And I wanted to say I have received a number of emails. Please send more. I'm kind of getting some different themes going here, and so we will combine them all. We will send out written responses. Thank you so much for participating. And also, I want to remind you that we have the conflict of interest training that Inder spoke about earlier. That is on June 30th. We will continue this discussion if we want to talk more about fair process, due process at that training, but it will be pretty much focused on conflict of interest training. And that's also another mandatory training. So either you can attend with us in person, or we will record it and send it out after. Again, thank you.
Talk about what you have to do if you need to recuse, and also financial conflicts of interest, which are maybe the source of the most frequent questions that we receive from commissioners have to do with financial interests. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you for joining us.